So yeah, my name is Chris Robison. I am working on a framework for personal tokens called meTokens. Um, meTokens is a protocol or like a generic or like a generalized framework for creating a certain type of incentive model or like desired outcome in the personal token space. There's a proof of concept that's currently on mainnet now at stakeonme.com. But what I want to talk about today is sort of like where meTokens falls in a broader sort of like topology of personal tokens, sort of like better understanding where all the different types of personal tokens that are being innovated upon or like new ones that could appear, sort of like the framework that they can fall within. Just to better understand like what kind of outcomes people can expect maybe from each type of personal token. So we'll start out with a quote, which is a favorite in the blockchain space from Charlie Munger of Berkshire Hathaway. Show me the incentive and I will show you the outcome. So yeah, as I mentioned, there are a bunch of different designs out there and they kind of fall into different economic structures or frameworks. So this is going to be talk about how to better understand that. So in economics, broadly speaking, there already is a framework for understanding different types of goods, and that's what personal tokens are, really, at the end of the day. They are a type of good. And generally, all types of goods fall into a quadrant based on a pair of characteristics. And these characteristics are whether or not a good is rivalrous, meaning that one person consuming it prevents another person from also consuming it. If it's non-rivalrous, when one person consuming it does not prevent someone else from using it. When it is excludable, meaning that it's possible to prevent someone from using that good. And when it is non-excludable, when it's not possible to prevent another person from using a good. So when a good is excludable and rivalrous, it is a private good. This might be something like a Nike shoe sold in a Nike store. You're prevented from consuming that shoe or like using the utility from it. It's excludable to you unless you go ahead and you pay for it, and it's rivalrous. So once you buy that shoe, it's yours. Nobody else can use it. So you consuming it prevents someone else from also doing so. When a good is excludable and non-rivalrous, it's a club good. So club goods are artificially scarce. You can be excluded from accessing it unless you pay for it, but consuming it doesn't prevent someone else from also consuming it. So this would be like Disneyland. You're excluded from consuming the joy of Disneyland unless you go ahead and buy a ticket. But you buying a ticket and entering the park doesn't prevent someone else from also buying a ticket and being able to enter. When a good is non-excludable and rivalrous, it's a common good. So no one can be excluded from consuming this common good, but consuming it does prevent someone else from doing so. So for example, this could be like a fishery. If you go, anyone can go ahead and fish there, but as soon as you catch a fish, that's your fish and you've consumed it, no one else can. So there's a type of open competition or rivalrous nature to a common good. That's very important to keep in mind as the talk goes on. And then lastly, we have when a good is non-excludable, non-rivalrous, it's a common good. So this would be like sunlight. No one can prevent you from absorbing your vitamin D. And you doing so, going out and sunbathing, doesn't prevent someone else from also sunbathing. So if we can understand all goods fall into this sort of categorization, then we can also take a look at personal tokens and sort of begin to identify what categories they fall into and what sort of incentives pop up out of that. So when a personal token is excludable and rivalrous, it's a private token. So this would be sort of like the Nike store putting together a product and going ahead and selling like their Nike shoe. This is an individual maybe packaging together like 1 hour of time and going ahead and selling that. They could be packaging together an income sharing agreement. They have this income that's coming in and they're going to go ahead and package 8% of that and sell that off to any sort of buyer of that good. If a personal token is excludable and non-rivalrous, then it's a club good. And a really sort of like simple or straightforward way to imagine this or think about this is that club tokens are sort of like accessing a person's personal brand. So for example, if you're using a token and buying it to purchase one retweet from the issuer, then you're sort of becoming part of the club of people that the issuer gives attention to, or sort of like curates for their audience. And similarly, or alternatively, an issuer could also create a token that gives access to something, such as like a subscription for a newsletter. And so when someone goes ahead and purchases that token, they're becoming part of the club of like this curated information from the issuer. Of course, like none of these, when they're consumed, prevents anyone else from also consuming it. Like if an issuer goes ahead and retweets you, they can also go ahead and retweet some other people. You just become part of this group of people who have been retweeted. The non-excludable types of personal tokens are a little bit more abstract, I guess. So there are common tokens, that'll be the subject of this talk a little bit. That's where I think meTokens falls into, and possibly like some other token designs. I'm kind of leaving this like broadly open. And then there are public tokens, which I really can't think of how a public token would work. I think the nature of blockchain to some extent doesn't provide an opportunity for this, but if anyone has any ideas about like what a public token might look like for an individual, for personal token, like definitely reach out. I'd be interested to hear what you think about that. So yeah, we will sort of dive into the common tokens. So if we're understanding common tokens, we can kind of compare that to the analog version of common goods and maybe look and see if there are any common tokens that already exist in the space, like what those incentives look like today. And this is like outside the spectrum of personal tokens, but just, you know, cryptocurrency in general. So when we have common goods in sort of like the analog world, those look most similar to natural resources. So they might be forests, like anyone can go there and harvest some wood. It could be a gold mine where people go and they mine for some gold, or fisheries, like I had mentioned, where they go and they catch some fish. And we sort of don't have any natural resources in crypto, but what we do have are different open types of competition that through the competition end up synthesizing new types of intrinsically valuable pieces of cryptocurrency. So for example, like proof of work, no one's prevented from going ahead and competing against each other in the mining process to go ahead and produce ether, but there is a finite amount of ether that is minted for each block. For any sort of liquidity provider protocols, people can compete to provide liquidity, and they might do some yield farming as a result of that. They might earn some kind of like governance token, for example. And then we also have protocols like MakerDAO, which allows people to open up collateralized debt positions, or CDPs. There is a limited amount of liquidity in the space. And so this is sort of like a competition to create a stablecoin or synthesized DAI, which is finite. And when one person holds DAI and uses it, it's rivalrous. So just like common goods, like natural resources, these common crypto assets are non-excludable. People permissionlessly compete to consume them like on an ongoing basis. And then once they're consumed, they're owned by that person who sort of like is successful in that competition process. So if we can understand that we do have common tokens already existing in blockchain in general, then it sort of stands to reason that we could also create one that is for personal token usage as well. So what are sort of the outcomes of common goods and common tokens, and then maybe what can we assume would be the outcome of a common personal token? Well, for gold mines, right, where people are going to mine gold, there's a whole sort of funnel of processing that happens. So there are miners that are the ones competing. They then sell the gold to manufacturers who then transmute the gold for different types of industry, whether that be like for producing jewelry or to have it be used in dentistry or aerospace. The result is through this competitive open nature of being able to like mine this asset, it ends up getting used for the highest source of utility. It has like the highest value of utility at the end of the day. So it really like benefits gold as the asset. For like proof of work, there's also miners for that. So they mine to go ahead and extract the ether, earn the block rewards, and then they might go ahead and sell this ether on the open market. This would be like to users or builders who are either deploying dApps or interacting with dApps, and these dApps might be used for different types of applications, such as like DeFi or NFTs, or creating different games, maybe for gambling. And sort of the nature of this competitive landscape is that it creates opportunities to produce the highest yield. And this is, obviously through competition, maybe the yield per individual ends up getting lowered, but the yield collectively as a whole starts increasing. So it's like a rising tide raises all boats. So what kind of happens when we look at a common personal token? Now, I'm sort of being a little hand wavy here, saying that whatever the marketplace looks like, it would need to be some sort of like automated market making mechanism. We use bonding curves with meTokens, but it could probably be any sort of automated market making mechanism, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But the funnel that you can imagine would sort of happen here is that there would be investors who would be like mining some sort of resource that is ultimately very valuable to the individual who the personal token is tied to. They might then take this asset and repurpose it or sell it off to employers who would then compete against each other to extract the most amount of productivity out of it, whether that's someone's like labor, attention, or their influence. And the desired hope is that the outcome would be that this sort of like meta market around an individual would lead to creating the highest potential income for that person. It would provide them with the most employers who are competing. It would sort of be like being hired by the commons as opposed to being hired by like one company at a time. So yeah, this is just each model versus their desired outcome. To really like simplify this, what the incentive structure kind of looks like, I think, is that with private and club goods, you're really working full time to be a merchant. You're packaging together different things that you believe are valuable, whether it be your time or your income. That could also be any sort of like information you curate, like I was mentioning earlier, like a subscription model or something like that. And you're going ahead and you're finding like a user base who you want to sell these items to. These are like self-issued assets. Common goods market would be sort of like this meta market that exists around you. Like everyone else is sort of mining for your resources, whatever this token ends up looking like, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute here. But this would sort of be something that isn't so controlled by the individual, meaning that all a person would need to do to participate in a common personal good or common personal token market is sort of like opt into it. It would sort of happen in the background. This is sort of like how the miners sort of participate in the background, and yet the users don't interact with the miners on an ongoing basis. So this would be hopefully a scalable option for people who are especially like at the beginnings of their career. It would be an opportunity for, say, like miners or these investors to come along and try and find people who have like the most potential long term. And so it might accelerate someone's progress throughout their career, something to that effect. So if you are the gold mine, like what exactly is this resource? Like what is the gold that people would be mining from you? And I think the answer is probably your labor. Your labor is your gold. And this was originally proposed by alternative monetary theorist E.C. Riegel, who was really the first person that I'm aware of to talk about individuals issuing their own types of money, which he just referred to generally as self-issued credit. He claimed that to issue money is a natural right of all people, and that labor is the sole commodity dealt with in all exchange. And he sort of extrapolated on that fact and said that if individuals are to create their own currency, then they're going to do it backed by their own labor through their own productivity, because productivity can always be repurposed for different types of products. Like one person can be hired to work at one company, and then they can totally change their career path and go work somewhere else, but it's still their labor at the end of the day. And for anyone who doesn't know who EC Regal is, you probably are familiar with one of his most famous catchphrases, which is now popularized through all of crypto, which is he coined the term separation of money and state, which is actually the subtitle to this series of essays, The New Approach to Freedom. So at the time, he was envisioning non-political money, which is really what we have today with like Bitcoin and Ether. But he even took that argument one step further and said that that would be the reserve currency for individuals who are issuing their own tokens or coins or types of credit. And this could also be used for businesses as well. So if we know that we're able to already create common tokens in all of crypto broadly through a process of synthesis, such as being able to generate ETH from the mining process and governance tokens from yield farming and DAI from CDPs, and if labor is sort of the gold to each of our own gold mines, then the best type of common personal token, I think, is that one token would equal 1 unit of synthetic labor, which is kind of an abstract term. But what that would mean is basically like it's a personal payment token. If you have a token that when you accept it, that's when you actually get paid, then that's what you would be willing to trade for your own labor. So that might be, I mean, you might go ahead and accept Ether or DAI or something like that, but having this own personal token would be the exact same to you as any of the other ones, especially if they're competitively synthesized through some sort of like open gaming process. And so that open gaming process could be something like an automated market maker, such as like bonding curves, which Simon talked about. And there's various types of bonding curves that can exist out there. We have like one modified version of it. I won't get into the details of it quite so much in this presentation, sort of out of scope and out of time. But if you do want to check it out, it is available to read. So yeah, go ahead and check that out, and I'll pause there for any sort of questions.
So some questions coming in. Does there need to be some kind of personal token standard? And does something like that exist so that people can cross the personal token chasm and become a celebrity?
Like, I think the question is there a standard for a personal common token?
Could there be, I suppose, yeah.
Yeah.
That would allow you to kind of cross over into the sort of mainstream celebrity world.
Yeah, I think we're kind of early on in those experiments. Like meTokens is a proposal for one of those, and that's one that is currently working. But I could imagine that there are other types of automated market makers that could exist that could potentially drive these incentives to like be accelerated even further. So it's kind of an open landscape, but I think the most critical thing is that for whatever model it looks like, whatever the standard or framework is for creating a common personal token, it would probably need to have like no limit to the token supply, meaning that it would need to be permissionless ultimately for people to obtain it. Like consuming it from one person when it take it away from someone else, it could be sort of like consumed from the ether.
So a bunch of questions from Jessica Zartler. It would be awesome if there were markets that would pay me for good things I already do, like health insurance, companies that would pay or reward me for meditating exercises, and then you would mine healthy behaviors. Can you talk a little bit about how these markets might develop and how companies might profit on this?
Yeah, that's cool. So I think it's all about having skin in the game, right? So if you have, and this is, pretty similar to especially like what Mike was saying earlier, is if you have folks who are interested in seeing you succeed, like if you succeed, it means that whatever value they have staked on you is also going to appreciate over time. It might mean that people do begin to pay you for things such as like meditation because they understand the long-term benefits of that. So I guess it would sort of be left to free and open market and making sure that whoever has skin in the game in terms of wanting to see you succeed over the long term is also aligned with those types of behaviors. And of course, it's like a two-way street. You could always present the data to people and just be transparent and say, this is like a life decision I'm making anyway.
And within your own sort of product, where are you in the build process, and what is the sort of first final application?
Yeah, so the first product, I mean, everything is completely on mainnet, so it's working as of right now. There are still later versions that we like a V2 that we were working on. Because one of the ways that we're thinking about it, so like for right now, you can go ahead and like tokenize yourself or create this meToken market for yourself, and other people can go ahead and buy it and they can spend it with you. So that's currently available. But for like a later version of it, one of the ways that we're thinking about having a pool of stakeholders is like if this is tied to a payment token, then the total pool of assets, like the market cap, vaguely represents the total demand for your labor. And that's an interesting asset that nobody has been able to own before. That's something that's like strictly native to blockchain. So if you can like have that, then perhaps you can collateralize it using some kind of interest-bearing assets like CDAI, for example, or when proof of stake comes in Ethereum, you can have some sort of derivative token that earns proof of stake rewards, meaning that like you can earn passive income from the demand on your labor, like that just like pools right into your wallet. So if there's like $100,000 staked on you or something like that, or Mike has like, let's say like 500,000, you could be earning like, I don't know, say 4% on that passively every single year. So.
And do you see that there's a market here for personal avatars as well with the synthetic labor? And
yeah, definitely. Right. So like a personal token should be designed in a way that really is scalable for everyone, whether that's a totally identifiable figure or someone who's completely anonymous or somewhere in between, maybe they're pseudonymous. And all that takes is just having an address. So it really generalizes the idea of what a digital identity could be. So that could be an individual who's known or like a real life person, but it could also be an avatar, someone who sort of takes the place of a real life person, like a synthetic influencer or something like that, which we're starting to see quite a number of those.
Are there any good tokenomics models you would recommend to a new issuer of personal tokens? And how can you create velocity within a personal token?
Yeah, I mean, I think the two large prevailing ones are coming from Roll currently, which is just to mint a token and then deploy that onto Uniswap. So you guys can check that product out. And then obviously I'm biased in saying like the token economics that I've published on is also, I think, a thoughtful deep dive that leaves room for like other versions to be iterated upon. And that's the meToken white papers. But I mean, I think those are the two prevailing ones. There are some other sort of peripheral products that are out there, like Unlock Protocol, I think is really awesome for being able to have subscription models. Mintbase is good for NFTs. Micro sponsors is awesome for selling units of time, which Lauren will talk about shortly. So yeah, there's a number of projects in this space, and those are a handful of them.
Are you aware of Circles, a system that allows people to issue tokens and also work as a universal basic income? And if so, what's your opinion?
Yeah, vaguely familiar with Circle. I mean, so like at a very high level, the money that we use on a regular basis is really backed by like the US dollar is backed by like the security of our country. Like we have force, right? That we can sort of back it by, and it's also backed by the productivity of us as an economy. So like, you could say that's maybe like the GDP or something. And of course we tax our citizens here to produce common goods for everybody, or public goods rather. And so those are consumed. Of course, like one of those could be universal basic income. And so when you're looking at personal tokens, in a way, you could think about that as sort of like migrating your productivity from being measured strictly in GDP terms to migrating it to non-state terms. So something that's like transnational. And if that's the case, if there's a group of people who are being transnationally productive and they're being measured in these different types of protocols and personal tokens and things like that, then there's no reason that you couldn't then synthesize a new token based on all of that productivity. So instead of having like a stable coin that's pegged to the dollar, you could have like a productivity coin that's somehow pegged or minted based on the collective productivity and like all the transactions that are occurring across everyone's personal token market. And that could be used for a number of different things. I suppose if people are participating in that process, there'd probably be governance tokens associated with it, in which case folks could vote on spending these productivity coins. They would be like growth coins as opposed to stable coins. They could vote on how to allocate those, if it's for building better infrastructure or if it is just to be distributed to everybody who's participating in this non-state network of productivity. And that could look like universal basic income.